Hello, hello, and welcome to my thought on this bright and sunny Tuesday in July. Almost the end of the month, can you believe it? I was reading William Butler Yeats, and it's and the that was the Uprising 1916. I think that's the title of it, and he says, "Too much sacrifice turns a heart to stone." And I wonder about that. That's sad because my grandma made a lot of sacrifices, and she was without doubt the kindest, most giving woman that I've ever met. Her story is interesting um, because we don't realize uh, how much of a blessing it was for people in Eastern Europe to come to the United States and to Britain, I'm sure, but to the United States. And my grandma was lived in a mud hut in Iași, Romania. And my grandpa, whom I guess was a swashbuckling, handsome bloke, walked into this hut where there were five little girls. And I have seen two of them. I've seen two of them. And he pointed to my grandma and he said, "I'll take that one." And that was her romance. It was her romance. And when he came and he got her pregnant, and then he put her on a boat, and she came to Toledo, Ohio. Why some misogynist sent her to Toledo, Ohio, I will never know. But my grandma would when she would they had no money, and my mother said that for years all they ate were boiled potatoes. She said, and on Fridays Mama would beg a lemon from the grocer so that it would taste better, and that used to just break my heart. And then she would talk about how my grandma served everybody, the five children and my grandpa, and ate what was left in the plate, which absolutely used to just tear my heart out because my grandma was such a wonderful, kind, happy lady. And that was the point. She was a happy, happy lady. And my mother always told the story about how she would serve everybody. She wouldn't eat anything, and she would serve everybody. And then if it was Friday night, she would try to have something special. And so she would make cake, and she would make a sponge cake, and they had they had a brother. There were four sisters and a brother, and it was my Uncle Charlie. And when my grandma would put out the cake, the little girls would be so excited because they were finally going to get cake, and my Uncle Charlie would point to the ceiling and say, "Look!" And all the little girls would look up, and when they looked down, their plates were empty. And I always felt so bad for them. But my grandma, who never went past, I don't think she went to school. I don't think she went to school, but she knew all the bills that came in, and she took charge of the bills. And the story is that she was very excited because they had an indoor toilet that my grandpa built, and it was wonderful. And then when they got a telephone, they put it directly across from the toilet, and because my grandma was 4 foot. My grandma was 4 foot 7. She was little. She looked like she was standing in a ditch, and when they got the telephone, which was a very big thing, it was a very big thing. Um, my Uncle Charlie, who was a joker, called her up on the phone, and my grandma was very methodical and very little, and she was standing at the sink, so she was standing on a little bench so she could reach the faucet. She was that little, and she was doing the dishes when he called, and then she got down and she walked into the hallway where the telephone was, and she picked up the telephone. She said, "Hello, hello," and my Uncle Charlie, and the voice said, "Hello, Mrs. Schwartz. We're from the telephone company, and we're testing the quality of the instrument. Would you mind going in the kitchen and turning on the faucet?" So she said, "Okay." and she got down off the little bench she was standing on to reach the telephone, went into the kitchen, got up on another bench, turned on the faucet, got down, walked across to the hallway, got up again, picked up the phone, and she said, "Yeah." He said, "Okay, Mrs. Schwartz, that was wonderful. We could hear that. Would you please flush the toilet?" So she said, "Yeah." And she got down off the stool and she went into the toilet, which was right across the hall, flushed the toilet. And then she came back and she said, "Yeah." And it was my Uncle Charlie, and he said, "Well, Mrs. Schwartz," he said, that we are so grateful to you for helping us test the quality of the instrument, that we're going to give you a blue ribbon. We'll be over in 35 minutes. Would you mind serving us all lunch?" And then she knew it was my Uncle Charlie. But the funny thing was that, of course, um, my Uncle Charlie was a joker, and he used to joke with the little girls as well. And my mother was a very idealistic young lady, and she she had long curls, and she was also the favorite. She was the favorite. She was the oldest. She was the one that knew English first, and she was the favorite. And I tell this story in my comedy routine, but I love it because people think it's not true, but it is true. Baking powder was invented while my grandma actually, I say it was the year she came to Toledo, but it wasn't. It was when my mother was about, maybe 8 years old, 9 years old, and baking powder was a very big thing because they used to use cream of tartar before to make cakes rise. And I always say it doesn't work with men, but it works with cakes. But cream of tartar had a very bad odor, so when you baked a cake, it smelled like someone dumped in it. So baking powder was very innovative, and it was sold by door-to-door salespeople. And I don't know whether you people are all too young to remember door-to-door salespeople. They were very popular during World War II and after World War II. And it was sold by baking powder. So a salesman tapped on my grandma's door, and he must have said something like, "I have a very innovative product to sell you." And my grandma, she did not understand English. She did not understand English. She spoke in Yiddish. But Jewish people are very hospitable, and especially my grandma. And she said, "Oh, I'll get you coffee." She was able to say that. She went in the kitchen. She brought back a cup of coffee, and the salesman took the coffee cup out of the saucer, poured some baking powder in it, and poured some coffee into the baking powder, and it formed a big brown cloud. And and he said to my grandma, "Smell it." She had no idea what he was saying, but she thought he was a pervert, and she threw him. She couldn't figure what he was doing, and she threw him out of the house. And when my mother came home that night, she said, "These crazy Americans, they like their coffee with a lot of foam in it." And that, people, is how the latte was invented. But that is the joke. But the real thing that happened was she left the saucer with the puffy brown fluff on the piano. They had a piano. They had a player piano that you cranked, and it played. And she left and my Uncle Charlie had been watching this whole thing. So when my mother came home from school, my Uncle Charlie took the plate with the fuzzy coffee foam in it, and he held it up to my mother's nose, and he said, "Smell it." And when she leaned down to smell it, he pushed the plate into her face. And he used to make those jokes with all four of the sisters. And when they got older, my mother was very close to two of the sisters. The one was the baby, and they hated her, and they all hated Uncle Charlie. So the truth is that Yeats is right. Too much of something turns a heart to stone, but it wasn't too much sacrifice, because my grandma did not have a heart of stone. She was the kindest, most generous person in the world. But if you do too much practical joking, you're going to turn your sisters' hearts to stone. And that's my thought for this Tuesday. Thank you so much for joining me.